Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Common Unity podcast. I've been really looking forward to this episode. I know I was meant to do it last week on the Queen's Gambit, but it's been Christmas and New Year's, and friends and family have gotten the better of me, which has been fantastic. I'm a little tired from just having so much social activity, but it's been so amazing, and I'm really grateful for that. But today, I want to get straight into talking about the Queen's Gambit because, well, it's just amazing, and the reason why it's so amazing is what I want to get into today. And for me, it really resembles for a lot of reasons, but I think that we can all take something from that story, and it kind of got really famous really quickly out of nowhere, for a reason, and I want to go into that today. So I'm going to mainly talk about the last episode where it all kind of comes together because, well, clearly, like any story, I mean, the part of the journey of the protagonist is that there's pieces there, and then they begin to either fragment or, come together in little ways here and there, and it keeps you going until the end. And then there's the big explosion of how it all comes together. And I think they did a fantastic job of bringing it all together that has such significant meaning. And I want to go into that today. So let's get straight into it. I was slightly critiqued from my poor depiction of what Harry Potter meant to us. So I want to go into a bit more detail on this one because I know a lot more about this particular story, because I rewatched some of it just so I could be clear about what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm going to talk about the main part of the ending and how it all comes together. But just to give a bit of context, and obviously spoiler alerts here, guys. If you haven't seen all 7 episodes, go and watch it. It's like an hour each episode. You'll finish it in a couple of days or a week or whatever. And then come back and listen to this. And I also want to hear your thoughts on this. So be sure to leave comments or like send me an email or whatever if you have questions or anything. And also if you have any ideas of like other stories that you want me to break down. Because I'm going to do one every week, as I mentioned. All right, so let's quickly just kind of summarize what I think the first 6 episodes means to us. What I think we resonate to Beth's story so much is that, well, she comes from, she was basically born into like malevolence, I would say. I mean, there's clearly the scene of her mum like intentionally crashing a car and killing her. I mean, that's a pretty traumatic start, and maybe you haven't had a trauma that big, because obviously that's pretty big, but we can all relate to trauma in some way, shape or form. And from what I've learned in my studies, people don't necessarily need to be abused as a child to have trauma. I mean, you may have just been exposed when you were 8 years old in your classroom for doing a stupid assignment, and everyone's laughing at you, and maybe that's enough to be traumatic for you. So it's all kind of relativism to your life and your experiences. But the point is, I think that if you're not, like throughout your childhood, if you're not correctly cared for and given that environment to process those little traumas that happen to all of us, then I mean, it's likely that it's going to be carried with us. Now, that's why I think we relate so much already to Beth's story. I mean, she's already born into the fall, right? What happens in Adam and Eve. It's you're conscious, and then all of a sudden that's the fall. That's it. You now know good and evil because you've experienced something that you shouldn't have done or whatever. But that kind of doesn't really relate, I guess. But I think you guys understand what I'm saying. So we all kind of know that the sense of being itself is suffering. I mean, that's cross-religiously something that seems to come up everywhere from what I understand. So, all right, so we already resonate with that darkness because there's some part of that in you, and there's a lot of light in you too, and we're going to get to that, and that's how it kind of like comes together at the end. So she gets her mum. That happens to her mum, and she's like 4 or 5 years old. Who knows where the dad is? I mean, they didn't really make that clear at the time. And I don't think they really ever made it clear towards the end. I mean, the only thing they really made clear was that she wasn't wanted. All right. And there's some sense of us, I think, that walks around and drags our body around this earth, not feeling wanted a lot. And that's something that we need to deal with and process and become comfortable within. Right. Okay. So then after that happens, she gets put into an orphanage. In the orphanage, she's, again, I mean, how unwanted could you feel other than, being put in an orphanage at that age? And so then she develops a friend, Jolene, who's the one who tells her about the drugs. So when she goes in line and they give her a red pill and a green pill, and I forget what the red one's for. It's probably for anxiety or health or something. And then the green one is like, I think they said it's like a horse tranquilizer or something. And so Jolene says to her, she whispers and says, save it for bed, right? So she's already gotten a tip from there. So there's a connection. And now Jolene becomes like her little buddy throughout all this. And then, and Jolene returns, by the way, in the 7th episode. And she's a big part of, I think, pushing Beth later on, which we'll come back to. But then, okay, so she's in this like really dark place. I mean, they depict the orphanage as such a like hell almost, like it's just so and even with the basement thing with what's his name, Mr. Shable, I mean, it's so dark, and again, I think they made it dark for us to really see the darkness and see and feel what it's like to be in that pit, so that when it all comes together, we know how amazing it can be if you can get out of that pit. Okay. Anyway, so she's pretty young. She doesn't really have much say in the matter, but she's in this situation. She then develops a relationship with Mr. Shable down in the basement. I'm not going to go through all the details of that, but it's a bit of a like, who is this mysterious like person that's teaching me a game? I wanted to learn. I was curious. I mean, that was the first step, right? She's curious because she goes into the basement. She sees him playing and she wants to play, but he doesn't let her. So there's that level of curiosity that we all have, like, oh, I'd like to do this, or I'd like to do that, but I can't because of this or because of that. I mean, we all have those experiences daily, probably, based on our limitations, but we're curious. And that is a really important thing to hold and drag out and use that curiosity for trying to really like just pull ourselves through life and make the most of it and make the most of our potential, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So the first step is to be curious, and that kind of happened in Adam and Eve as well, by the way, with like the fruit and all that. And then, but anyway, different story. So then, okay, so she eventually, they build a relationship together, and he teaches her one by one, and he doesn't let her win and all that. And then she eventually wins, and it's all beautiful and great. Then she gets adopted. And when she gets adopted, she goes into another really broken situation because, maybe the family has money, the mum and the dad, but the dad didn't want her, and the dad just wanted her to satisfy the mum, who was an alcoholic, and that comes up later as well. Okay, so let's kind of fast forward throughout her journey. She develops relationships with people, and she also develops a relationship with drugs. And what I find so interesting about that is, again, like, we can all relate to this in some way, because as you go through your life, there are people that you draw closer to you and push away. There are moments of vulnerability and weakness where maybe you've given in to some part of your impulse just to cope, or just to make sense or make sense of this stupidity of life that we live in. I'm pretty aggressive when I guess I use some of those words, but bear with me. Because it's so important to see the darkness so that we can know what we're running from and, have legitimate reason to not fall back into a pit of where we came from or where we're susceptible to falling into. And I'm certainly, no saint, and I'm guilty of falling into many pits along the way in my almost 31 years. But yeah, okay. So she's put into this home that seems nice, but it's just not. It's broken again. So, but she has a bit of a relationship with the mum, and that's probably her temptation towards, and the normalization of drinking, and then Beth ends up getting into like smoking a bit of weed, and then she's still taking those horse tranquilizers as a way to access this like part of her that can win these games. I mean, like every time she was like taking these drugs, she would see the game on the roof, and she sees it playing out, and maybe that's like a cheat way of getting there, right? Because if she didn't have the drug, I wonder how amazing she would be. And again, this comes up later, which I'll get to, but we can all kind of like relate to that, because I think that we go about our life and we have our limitations as humans, but what's so beautiful is that when you like, okay, before I get to what's beautiful, we need to understand what's not beautiful. And what's not beautiful is engaging in malevolent behaviors that we know are not doing us any good, but they might be cheap ways to get us somewhere. I mean, the most extreme sense of that would be if you stole money. I mean, it's not your money to take. You're supposed to earn money. But if you steal it, you would have the money, but it's not the right way to do it. And that comes from that darkness we talk about. That's just one little example, I suppose. But the right and proper way is to earn the money, doing something that is meaningful and doing something that contributes. And then the reward is the money. And then with the money, you get to pay for things that help you live, and then continue doing the same thing. And then that all integrates. But coming back to, I guess like what I was saying about, she has to have that darkness in order to know what the light is. And I guess like this is another part of the story. Okay, so as she goes on, again, she develops little friendships with the people, and there's a sexual part of it as well, which makes us curious, as we're sexual beings, and that attracts us to the romance and all that. But there's one person she doesn't actually have the sexual relationship with, but she has an intimacy with, and that's I think his name is Towns. I think it says DL Towns. I looked it up, but I can't remember his actual first name in the story. And so he's the reporter who's like really handsome and everything. And to me, as we break down each person and what it means to her, I think I think Towns represents a certain part of her that we can all relate to. That is this organic, beautiful, benevolent part of us that wants to do good. And we have this love and intimacy with that sometimes we forget. Sometimes we put that aside because it's just, we almost don't feel like we're worthy of it, but we are, and it's there, and it's always there, but we just need to access it. And later on, he comes up in the story as well, which I'll get to. So then she also comes across, on her rise to the top, she beats all these people, and I think it's Benny and Harry she has these romantic relationships with, but they both mean different things, and they both signify different parts of her. That one's maybe a bit more dangerous, one's more studious, one's more attractive for whatever reason, or one's more dangerous again, like for other reasons because of the drugs, or maybe there's the scene where she loses control with Benny from the fast games where she was gambling with him, and that like makes her upset, but it also taught her something. So maybe those parts of the characters in our life and the people we come across or the experiences we have, while they may be painful, pain is a very, very powerful vessel to teach us things. And I've certainly know that after the year I've had with the physical and psychological pain that I went through for like 9 months. I mean, it was horrible, but I've come out the other end. I've still I am still a work in progress and always will be, but I've come out the other end where I just feel like a whole part of me has died off, and I've kept all the goodness that I've accumulated over the years, but there's all this like horrible bits of deadwood that have just like shed off me. And yeah, I think that's kind of similar to what's happening with this story, because along the way in the first 6 episodes, she's really developing all these different relationships. And again, like in the story, we're watching it and they're people, but the thing is, each person is a representation of what's going on up here, because we know that like you're not just one person, you're not one being, you're an integration of multiple beings, right, within yourself, and then that goes externally. So the reason why we are highly social people and we need each other is because each other person that we come across can bring out a different part of us. So I'm not the same person with my mum who I am with my friend who I've known since I was 15. We show different parts, and we get to express and use different parts of ourselves and learn from each person in our community. So, okay, that's a really important tangent, because I think that's where it all comes together and why. Well, I basically watched the last episode again this morning. It's only 10 a.m. here, but I watched the last episode this morning, and it got me in tears. Like I was actually crying, and I've seen it before. I know what happens, but the way they did it and the way it all came together really got to me. And like I said about pain being a really powerful vessel for teaching us things, well, so is so is everything. I mean, happiness. Happiness is the reward of doing something that you should be doing, and so you do more of it. Within reason, but that's a different topic. So like I was feeling this emotion from watching it because I'm connected to it, and it relates to me, and I think it relates to a lot of us. Okay, so let's come back to the point. Okay, so I think painted a good enough picture of what happens you've all watched it anyway. So when we get to the last episode, this is where it all comes together. So the episode it starts off with Jolene returning from the orphanage, and she heavily judges Beth. Like Beth's gone on this journey, but Beth's now alone in the house. By the way, she bought the house that her adopted mother died, and then the other father didn't want it, so she buys it and she tries to just set herself up there. Jolene returns out of nowhere. I actually forget how she comes back into the story. But the point is, she comes back and she's like this beautiful part of Beth who, when Beth was young, Beth had this bond with this person who came from the same type of malevolent upbringing. Sorry, there's something on my computer there. So Beth has Jolene, but Jolene's not just a person. She's not just a friend. She's a reminder to Beth of where she came from and the fact that Beth was just a little kid. And a lot of us have that. We have that kid, that little child inside of us that wants to play, wants to do things, wants to explore and all that. But as you get older, we tend to suppress a lot of it because it's too dangerous out there and it's too risky, or I haven't accepted parts of things. And so I think it's beautiful that Jolene comes back, because what she does is she is brutally honest with Beth. She says, she looks around the house and she's like, you've been drinking, like you've been taking you're still taking the green pill, she says to her. And Beth's like openly honest with her as well, right? And that's another good representation of what honesty can do if we're honest with ourselves and honest with other people. So, it's about being really precise in your speech and not actually just sugarcoating things or half-assed sharing things. I mean, when you have someone that's that close to you and you trust them, or even if it's with yourself, in your mind, you might do your journaling or whatever, be brutally honest. Get it really out there. Like all those dark thoughts or insecurities that you might have, get them out there, because it's amazing what happens when you put it out there for the universe and for the everything to make sense of it, so that you can leave it behind and have a better life. But all right, so Jolene says, I can't believe you're still doing all these drugs and all that, and you're drinking. And even Beth just says Beth says, oh yeah, what I want to do right now is just have a drink. All I want to do is have a drink. But she's already on the realization that that's not going to help her. I mean, she knows, and we all know that. We all have things we're doing every single day that we know we shouldn't be doing. And we know that we're cheating life by doing them, and we're ignoring things, we're neglecting things. And boy, that has a cost. That has a significant cost. And it's another thing I experienced this year. I mean, my serving of judgment, I believe, was physical health at 30. I shouldn't have to have gone through that if I'd prepared myself better. And if there's an element of luck, but obviously luck favors the prepared. We all know that. It's pretty clear that all these successful people out there work hard at it and they put the effort in, and then that pays off for them. So one thing I think is interesting now is what happens is Jolene says, oh, Mr. Shable died. So the mentor from the basement who taught her everything, again, it's another representation of her childhood. He dies. And that's a trigger, right? That's death and pain are triggers for us to really recalibrate and look back to take inventory of what's going on in our life, and where maybe I need to learn something more. Maybe I parked something 10 years ago and I haven't addressed it. And when someone dies, that's what happens. That's what seems to happen, I'll say. We have a part of, yes, that person has passed on, which is sad in itself, but also what we had with them also seems to die off. Now, there's something really tragic in that, but we're built for that. We're built for tragedy. We're not built for betrayal, but we're built for tragedy. So we can accept that and make sense of it. And I think that in this situation, with Beth, it couldn't have come at a better time for her, because she's about to go to Russia and take on the big bad boss, which we all see as like the big mountain, the big challenge. And she's come a long way to get there, but there's just something that needs to happen for her to really release. And this is how it starts. So she then goes back to the orphanage with Jolene, and she's like, oh no, I don't want to go in. It's too scary. No, I'm done. I don't want to go in there. But then she goes to Mr. Shable's funeral, and after the funeral, she says, I think I'm ready to go back in there. So that's, again, a good representation of when, well, the orphanage represents the darkness that we don't want to face because it's too scary, it's too much, it's too traumatic for us to turn around and look at what we haven't dealt with or what we're suppressing. But what happens with Beth, which is amazing, is that she says, no, I'm going to go in there. I want to. And so she goes in, and then she goes down to the basement. And when it really, I mean, this has also got me tearing up when I saw this part. But what is so amazing about what happens there is she's looking around at this empty, it's just an empty basement now. But what she finds is all the pictures on the wall of the fact that Mr. Shable was following her the whole time. You know, there's all the cutouts of the newspaper and all that. And I mean, that's just, I mean, that really triggered me. And I was wondering why it triggered me. And I think that the trigger here is that the child that she was, and the child that, you know, that what Mr. Shable represented to her was so intrinsic to her and so like amazing that he still behind the scenes was following her in all her success and journey and all that stuff. And we have that in us. Like, there's a part of us that is in the basement in our mind, and that person is the child that has dreams and aspirations, and it's always watching and going and being proud of that. Maybe we don't like remind ourselves of that, but that is pretty amazing. I mean, when you look at kids, it draws that out of you. I mean, when you look at a kid open a present or like just get ready for a field day or something like that, like they're so excited, and part of us sees that and gets to vicariously experience that because we know what it's like to imagine. We know what it's like to dream, but it happens mostly when we're younger. And then when we get older, it gets way more difficult because life is just too complicated for me to even articulate in this episode. All right, so another tangent, but they're all important. And, you know, I don't really care how long this episode goes for. I want it to be, I want to really break it down the way I've wanted to break it down because it means something to me. And I think there's so much in it. There's just so much in it. Okay, so where are we? So, all right, so yeah, there's even a stage, a scene there where I think that Beth comes out of the orphanage and she goes back in the car, and then there's just this release. There's this like cathartic release of, you know, almost sadness and everything, but there's the acceptance there as well of, okay, well, like, you know, that's a reminder of where I came from, and I've been doing all these things, but I'm not living up to my potential because I'm still drinking or taking the drugs or whatever. And then Jolene even says, you know, she calls her guardian angel. So hang on, I'm just trying to see here. Yeah, so Jolene actually also oh no, that's it. Okay, I remembered. Sorry, I've got notes here and I'm trying to like go through it. But yeah, okay, so I remember now. So Jolene actually also says to Beth, like, I've always followed you. I've always followed you in the news and everything. And then Jolene also offers her money to help her, you know, and so that's again another part of the childhood that hasn't died off. It's still youthful, and it's still there to help her. And obviously in the story she gives her money, and it'd be nice if parts of my psyche would give me money, but that doesn't seem to work. So you got to get it on your own. But yeah, so that's another part of like her childhood that's still kind of there, lurking. Not lurking. Lurking's kind of has a negative connotation. It's there, watching over you like your guardian angel, which she calls her. Okay, so it's kind of clear there, which is cool. All right, so the next step is there's like the Christian group that were paying for her things because like they wanted her to be this, like, you know, because she already had so much attention, they wanted her to then continue with that, with, you know, telling the Christian story and preach that. But it didn't resonate with Beth. She didn't want to be that person. She wanted her own journey. She didn't want to do things just for the sake of where others put her. She wanted to create that on her own, and we can all relate to that. So then she turns the help away from the Christian crew because, well, it's not her and it's not who she wants to be. And that comes up a lot in this story, by the way. And then she rings Benny, and Benny says, Benny rejects her and says, no, I'm not giving you any money. It doesn't even matter if I've got it or not. I'm not giving it to you because some part of Beth has used and abused who Benny was to her. And again, it's another part of our psyche that we use it to learn something, but then we abuse it by not making use of it. And then we have to be careful, because at some stage it might get too late and we might not be able to use those parts of the wisdom that we accumulate from the people or the things we learn. So there's a bit of a rejection there, which makes us, it's almost like hang on, maybe it's not all coming together, right? So there's that excitement in that. And then, okay, so that's kind of like, how does she end up getting, so then Jolene gives her the money and then she gets to go to Russia, which is kind of the point of what's happening in the last episode. She's going to Russia to take on the big bad boss and all the little steps in, to get there. All right, so then when she gets to Russia, she's constantly tempted by so many different things. I mean, the Russians are drinking vodka and they tempt her. They're knocking on the door and bringing alcohol. Like, there's so many temptations, but she's already on the path to goodness and the path to her potential, because she's realized first by facing her fears, by going back to the orphanage. She's faced it. She's starting to accept, piece by piece, and it doesn't happen overnight, even though it happens in a 1 hour episode. The point is, like, for us, like, for what we can take from that is that it doesn't happen instantaneously. It's a step-by-step process, and we need to put one foot in front of the other and address one thing at a time wholeheartedly. And that's the key point here, I think I took from that. But then, okay, so she's starting to get tempted constantly. Well, not starting, she was always tempted, but she doesn't give in, which is the key part here. But she does have her drugs with her, which is kind of an interesting thing. It's like, why would you even tempt yourself with that? But yeah, so she's got them with her. Maybe it's just habit. And we all, actually, that's probably what it is. It's just habit. It's habit to have what we've always used as coping mechanisms or ways to access more or whatever. But yeah, so she's got them with her. But then there's a scene where she has that temptation of using them, but she goes and puts them in the toilet. So that's another good part of it as well. So she's already coming to this realization. She's turning a corner, and then she starts playing. Now, she plays a couple of guys and beats them, and they're kind of pissed off about it, whatever, which is quite interesting as well, because I think the reason why there's a lot of like that happening is because, well, clearly she's a female and in a very male-dominated field. And yes, that's great for females watching this, and they can certainly resonate to that. I can certainly understand that. Well, while that was the 50s, even our day right now still has limitations for women that maybe men could have. But the thing is, it's not only about that. It's not only about like females rising to the top in a dominated field. It's about anyone rising to the top of any field. And she's the stray. She's the I guess the underdog, and we love that because we're an underdog. Each one of us are underdogs. We are born into so much like uncertainty, and we're put into this environment where everything is hard work, or at least everything worth value is hard work. So sometimes we don't put in the hard work, which is why we get into shitty situations. But okay, so then the next part, which I wanted to note, was really interesting. So then she plays the fuzzy hair guy. I forget his name. He's like the Russian guy who used to be the best in the world, but now he's kind of old. And Borgov, which is the other main boss. Borgov is the younger version of him. But anyway, so Beth then plays the fuzzy hair guy, and he represents another role model, right? I think not another role model, but he represents a role model of Beth's, because what happens is they play a game and they adjourn, and then they come back, and what happens then is that Beth beats him, of course, but he like tips his hat to her and is just like, wow, you're amazing, this is yours, take it. And she says to him, like, I've been following you since I was young, you're an amazing player. And so there's something amazing in that, right? So that's a side topic as well about role models. If you want to achieve something, if you want to face things, if you want to live up to your potential, pick people in your life, or maybe it's not even a person you know well, but someone you see and really admire. For me, when I was younger, Dave Grohl was one of those. And in poker, I had a couple of players who I really, really loved the way they did things. So you just pick that and you follow that, and you see what they're doing right. And maybe there's things they're doing wrong that you don't like, and you don't have to do that, right? So pick a role model. And I think Beth like really saw a role model in this fuzzy hair guy, and now she's come to this point where she's beaten him. I mean, that's pretty fucking cool. Excuse my French, but like to get to that point where you can take on someone who, like, you know, when you were a child, you really like admired. I mean, that's kind of cool, right? So there's a sense of achievement already in that. So then moving on, then she comes back to this scene of her mum crashing, and they that kind of reminds her again. It's another reminder of where she's coming from and all that. And then, okay, so there's a part in that actually where, and this happens in the game with Borgov, where they have the game gets adjourned. So they stop playing, they come back the next day. And what I think that, I mean, every game has that, right? And what I think is so resonating about that is that when you're in a game and when you're really engaged in doing something, and when I say in a game, I mean like the game of life almost as well. When you're in something, poker had this as well for me, which I'll talk about, but there's always like ways of having breaks and timeouts in every game you look at. There's no game that will just kind of start and then go to the end and finish. In terms of like a professional setting, obviously you could play, obviously there's multiple small games you could play that start and finish, but in most, I guess, professional settings, which we love to watch apparently, there's always halftime, there's quarter time and all that. And so what happens there is one of the most important things, because what Beth realized, and they talked about this before, was the Russians would actually gather together and they'd work as an entourage and they'd share parts of things together, and they would grow as a community as players. And yes, they're out for their own individual satisfaction, but at the same time, you can't get there to your highest potential on your own. So they use each other, which is amazing. And that happens in poker as well. I saw many little entourages of poker players who they were also individually good at the game, that they just kept learning from each other's experiences and talking, and they probably never needed a coach or anything. So the difficult thing in poker or in any industry is if you go it alone, well, you need a coach. So then you maybe have to pay for someone to do it, to help guide you, which I do, by the way, as a side note. If you'd like poker coaching, and just hit me up. So yeah, like I think what I'm trying to say here is that it's so important what we do when we break, and even God rested on the seventh day after creating the heavens and the earth. So if you don't have a break and relax and also process things, you won't get anywhere. Like well, that's not true. You won't get where you want to go as quick as you can. So, I mean, this kind of, I think it was Freud or Jung said this as well, that like, we can't always be around people. Yes, we're social beings, but we need time alone, because in that time alone, and I'm not saying that in the time alone you just sit there and watch TV all the time, or, you know, get involved in drugs or whatever. I'm saying that in that time alone, you got to use things to process things and learn from things, like whether it be meditation or music or whatever. Like there's got to be some time alone to recalibrate your thoughts, make sense of some things, and then hypothesize about what you're going to do next and start visualizing that. All right. But yeah, so as this goes on, by the way, there's so many scenes that really try and make Beth who she's not. I mean, the reporters, they're always asking her questions about things to shape her in a way, and a way that like looks good for reporting, which happens in real life. There's also like ways where I think the guy who what would you call it, the security guard who took her to Russia, I mean, he was also constantly in her ear saying like, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, you got to come to this meeting and do this and say this and all that, and she just doesn't like it. I mean, that's fair enough, like, which is cool. Like she's rising to the top, but she doesn't want to be who they tell her to be. She's trying to be organically who she is, which we can all relate to that. Okay, so then a really cool thing happens. So she's there after, I think the game with, I'm not sure exactly when it happens. I think it's in the game with Borgov when, yeah, it is. Yeah, so she starts playing Borgov, gets like halfway. He calls the game adjourned. So as she's walking out, all these people are trying to interview her, and she says a little bit about her Mr. Shable and all that. And she says, make sure you print that, because that means something to me, and I don't want you to skew the truth. So that's cool in itself. And then the beautiful Towns reporter, comes back. The guy I was talking about before, this handsome man who is a part of her that never tested her in a way she didn't want to be tested, and was always safe with her. But there was so much intimacy. I mean, there were times there where she could have definitely given in and slept with him, or probably drank with him or something, but she never did. And that's kind of cool in itself, where this guy now represents such an organic part of her that can access the divine, I suppose. And well, I mean, that triggered me again when he came in and he just shows up. He's looking all handsome with his scarf and everything. I was like, okay, wow. And it's not just that you're a beautiful man. It's just that it means something so cool. And she knows it too. And she just runs up and hugs him. And then they hang out in the hotel room and you know, catch up and all that. Then what happens is the next best amazing thing, okay? Because what happens... Oh, no, actually, I think even Towns questions her about like what she's doing, where she's at, and she says something along the lines of, well, I need the pills. I need the pills to access and beat Borgov. But then she comes to her own realization and says, or at least I thought I did, right? So she's already coming to that on her own. He doesn't prompt her in any way. He just sits there and holds the space for her, which is kind of amazing. Then Towns gets a call from Benny, Harry, and all the other crew of the people she's come across and the people she's had in her life and journey to get where she is. And the most amazing thing about that is they all come together, just like what I was saying about the Russians with their entourage, and they all try and map out the way for her to beat the boss. And oh my God, that part there is the best, because what it says is that, like, you don't have to do it alone. Right? Everything you want to do in this life, actually, as a matter of fact, you probably can't do it alone to your fullest potential, because, well, we need each other. We need other resources and other brains. The world is way too hard and way too complicated for one brain to process it all and make sense of it and do what's good and not what's evil. So that scene is so amazing because they all come together and they kind of push aside their differences and they work together as a team, and they give her all night. They're working on mapping out how to beat him. Okay, so now you've got all these people in your life, or maybe parts of your psyche, that need to integrate together. And, you know, it's not to say that all happens in an epiphany, but it happens over time. That, all right, so this sibling meant something to me here, or this friend, or this, you know, family member, or this work colleague. Like, they're all there to teach me things, and I'm there to like also help them, and it's this give and take thing, and you're all like collectively growing, which yeah, I mean, I've been really trying to integrate that into my life lately, so that's why it stood out for me. All right, so then when the game resumes, something happens that they didn't predict, which, well, welcome to life. It's unpredictable sometimes. Borgov makes a move that it's not something that the team thought was going to happen. So then what happens, and this is where it all comes to a big explosion, is that she takes a deep breath. Now that already is a good sign of, like, all right, when you're faced with uncertainty and when you're faced with something that you just did not predict, which will happen a lot, by the way, it's so important just to breathe. I mean, just take a couple of deep breaths, and you could meditate for 10 minutes or something, or you could just, you know, whatever that means to you, to take a breath, to take a break, to take a step back and recalibrate. I mean, even God breathed life onto Adam, right? So breath is life. We know that. Like, yeah, for centuries we would know that. And if you stop breathing, you're dead. So she takes this breath, and that calms her. And then what she does then is, because she's turned and faced her trauma, she's accepted a lot of her journey and what's happened to her. She's accepted the help of the entourage, and she's now got everything she needs. She doesn't need drugs anymore. So she hasn't taken the drug, and she's here organically fighting the big bad boss, which is the big mountain, and she's able to climb it, and she accesses that higher sense where she can see the game playing out on the roof. I mean, like, so the beautiful thing here is, like, she's done it organically. She's done it while she's sober. She's done it by facing her fears, processing it, working together with her entourage, and then conquering the mountain, conquering the bad boss, conquering whatever it is that you think that you need to overcome to achieve whatever it is you're looking to achieve. And that's so amazing. I mean, I like that moment there was just amazing. And then she comes back to the game and she starts beating him, and you can see it on his face. He's getting a bit frustrated, and then he offers a draw, which is quite interesting because, I mean, if you're the best in the world, you probably don't want to offer a draw. So he's already seeing like a sign of defeat, and he's decided that, well, I'm probably going to lose this game, so let's at least go for mercy, right? And then the reporter, I think, the commentator says something which is quite interesting. The commentator says, this is interesting because Borgov has always been the best end game player, so now he's offering a draw, but Elizabeth Harmon, she's not a strong end game player and she's never been here before, so this will be interesting what she does. If she offers a draw, if she takes the draw, that would be an incredible achievement on its own, but if she doesn't and she goes for winning, then that is just next level. Like, I mean, that's not exactly his words, but that's what he meant. He meant to say that a draw would be mediocre. And I think for us, in this situation, it would be mediocre for her because of everything she's done to get herself there. So she decides, you know what, mediocrity is not for me, and it's probably not desirable for anyone, to be honest. I mean, who wants to be with someone or hang out with someone who's barely mediocre? We want to be with people who are amazing and people who are just great people. Like, mediocrity is not desirable, I think, and I think that's what kind of teaches us something about that part. So she declines, and then she takes the last move eventually and beats him, and the look on her face, she almost like, takes that sigh of like, well, she's in disbelief now because she's beaten him, and that was just the end for that like whole journey, and she's done it. And then what happens then is Borgov hands her the thing and says, it's yours, take it, you earned it almost, and well done. And then he kind of shakes her hand and claps, and everybody claps, and then she walks outside and everybody claps out there again. And so she's heavily praised for achieving that, and again, I mean, like that's the reward, the recognition, the love, the gratitude of other people to what you've done. In this field and in any, like, I guess, professional field like that, you do get people actually doing that and praising you. And that's why we praise them, because it is so hard to do what these people do that it's worth praising. I mean, you sacrifice so much to get yourself into this spot. Yeah, I'll praise that, right? That's why we clap whenever we watch a performance or we watch a game, or, and we intrinsically like just do it because we know that we want to clap. We want to show that appreciation. So that's what happens with her. Then she really gets rewarded in that sense. And then as we're coming to the end of all this, and thank you for listening all this way, by the way, I hope I'm making sense of it and you're resonating with some of it. The other part of the celebration is they call home, and Benny and Harry and all those guys, they all get to celebrate as well. So you get to share the glory of what you've done with your entourage, because they are big parts of it as well. And I think that's why we have parties and things, birthday parties, celebrations for all sorts of things, because we get everyone together and we celebrate that I've done something, or I am something, or you know what, I'm a year older, so it's my birthday. So yeah, let's celebrate that I survived this hellhole for another year. That's a pretty good accomplishment in itself. So then the last kind of part is that they're in. So Beth and her guard are in the car going to the airport, and the guard's saying, "Oh, yeah, you got a meeting with this person. We're going to get you with the president so you can get a photo op beating him and all that." And Beth's just like, "I don't want to do that. I don't want to go and live that life anymore. I want to. I don't know what it is exactly she would want, but." What happens next is a resemblance of being humble, okay? Because she says, no, can you stop the car? I want to get out. She gets out, she walks through the park. And I think what that, I struggled to understand what that represented, actually, this scene, because I was like, none of these old men are in the park playing chess are anyone that has come up in the story before. But what it says to me now, as I thought about it, was that, she's risen to the top and she was heavily praised for what she'd done, but she remembered her roots, and her roots were, that she was an orphan, and Mr. Shable in the basement was this old man who taught her all this stuff. And so I think walking through the park with all these old men reminded her of where she came from, and that kept her humble. And you hear it with all sorts of, like, just go and listen to anyone's acceptance speech in the Grammys and all that. Like, they always want to recognize where they came from, and that's the beautiful part of everyone's story and rise to the top, that they came from nothing or something humble to create something. I mean, Lord of the Rings is like that too. They came from this humble little shire where no bad happens, but then he takes on evil itself and journeys through, and then the return to that is the beautiful, I guess, like, ribbon around the whole story. So then she gets praised again from all these old people, and she sits and plays a game with one of them, and man, I mean, that's giving back. That is giving back to what has served you. That Mr. Shable was the one who really taught her and gave her a vessel, gave her a portal to true potential because of the, like, teaching her the game. And that's the representation of getting her out of that dark situation and dark start, and fighting through the world and really making the most of herself. So then sitting there playing against these other old men, I think is that the nice close of resembling all that. So guys, I'll leave it at that. That's a pretty long breakdown, and I appreciate you listening till the end. I think now, like, the conclusion and the question I'd like to leave you with after all this is, well, yeah, you can understand the whole story and you can maybe resonate to certain parts of it. But I think what's important is that if you put yourself in this story or something similar, well, what is it you're not facing? Like, you got to face the orphanage at some stage that Beth did, and maybe there are people in your life you're neglecting, or maybe you have people close to you that aren't serving you the way that needs to be served. I mean, as time goes on, friends die off, not actually, but like friends peel away and you accumulate new friends. And I wonder why that happens. And to me, I think that happens because the people we draw closer to us are the ones we need to teach us the most. And there's one thing pretty clear here, is that isolation, I know it's a difficult time to talk about something like isolation and all that, but that is where we kind of suppress everything and become numb. And then in that, like, we're not engaging with other people, we're not engaging with ourselves. That draws out those different parts of us. So it's so important to be social, we know that, but the real crux and the real reason as to why is because of everything I've just explained in this story. We need an entourage of people to pull us through and learn, and parts of us grow, parts of us die off, and we keep doing that. And that's just life. I mean, that's what I've learned, that it's not like an end game. It's like, that's just the journey, and it's the pursuit of that. Because when you get to the end of it, which I kind of experienced with my studies last year, I finished my degree, and then all of a sudden I'd risen to the top of my degree, and then I fell off into the pit because I couldn't find work, and it was really difficult to now start and get my foot into a new industry. Like, it's something like that is really difficult. And that happens with Beth as well, because, or that you could see how that could happen with Beth, because she rises to the top. She's beaten the biggest, baddest boss of them all. Now what? So it's so important, I think, to meditate over that, because when some part of you dies and you accomplish something, you've got to start looking at the pursuit of what happens next. All right, guys, I'm going to finish up there. I'm starting to ramble. So another really interesting question I think that I'd leave you with is, well, it's so important that we take ownership of what we're doing. We take ownership of the journey we're on. And right now, after 2020 and how difficult that's been, and how it's kind of shaken us all up to our core, use that. Find what is in your life that is actually something that you can access more of, because like deep down, and that's why I think that we have these beliefs, because we feel it. Okay, that's another message, another another vessel of another portal of how we should articulate our life, and the emotions are the rewards or the punishment. There's a lot of uncertainty in all that as well, but I mean, you just got to take hold of what is certain in your life and what you can predict. And the more and more you do that each and every day, becomes exponential. So guys, I wish you the best on your journey as you keep going. I hope you enjoyed my breakdown of this, and I hope I made some sense for that. It's one of my favorite stories for a long time. Next week, I'm not sure what story I'll do. If anyone has a suggestion, let me know. I just finished reading The Tattoo of Auschwitz, which was kind of cool, but it's not really a story in the sense of a fantasy, but there's certainly a lot I could take from it. So I may do that one, but if anyone has anything better to suggest, hit me up. Otherwise, I hope everyone's having a great new year, and yeah, go out there and do one thing today that could make your life just slightly better than it was when you woke up this morning. Thanks, guys.